Hello, I'm Philip Hughes and I'm the chair of the Maroondah Interfaith Network. And I welcome you to this fourth seminar in our series on compassion. As we start this seminar, I want to pay tribute to the First Nations people who've cared for this land for so long, especially the Wurundjeri people on which this film is being developed. The aim of these seminars is to understand the faith of the different groups of people in our community. It's also to enhance our own thinking about our faith. In the second and third seminars, we explored Buddhist and Hindu conceptions. The Buddhists explained how wisdom needs to be a companion of compassion. And the Hindus explained to us how the head needed to be combined with the heart and the hands in compassionate action. This seminar is about Christian understandings of compassion, and particularly those that have developed in the Uniting Church. Rev Lucas Taylor has prepared the presentation for us, and others will be involved in that presentation. Lucas has been the minister at the Ringwood Uniting Church for several years. Personally, I've found Lucas to be both down to earth in his approach to the Christian faith and always stimulating in his presentation.
I'd like to begin with some words of blessing from the Franciscan tradition, and I think it picks up some of the themes that I'll touch on as well. So may God bless us with discomfort. Bless us with discomfort at easy answers, at half-truths, at superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears. Bless us with tears. Tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all children and the poor. So some Christian principles of compassion. I want to move us through, link together some threads of compassion, empathy, solidarity, and justice. Broken down, the word compassion simply means to suffer with, or to bear with, or to endure with. Passion shares the same root word as patience and patient. So it's not just about suffering, but it's about bearing and patiently enduring. Now, the majority of column inches in the Gospels is spent on the period of time of Jesus' torture and execution, his death, known as the Passion of Christ, the suffering, the endurance of Jesus towards his death. If we line up the four versions of the Gospel in the New Testament, if we line them up in the order in which biblical scholars suggest they were historically collected and written down, being Mark, Matthew, Luke, pretty close to each other, and then John, you could actually describe these, and in fact these stories have been described as simply the story of Jesus' death with increasingly long introductions. So it all being about the passion of Jesus, this period of his torture and execution with increasingly long introductions. So if this story is such a foundational story within the Christian faith, and it's known as the Passion, and if we are called to live lives anything like Jesus, then it stands that Christians are called to the task of enduring and bearing with our own burdens, as we're not simply on about escaping the world like some sort of doomsday cult, as well as bearing with others, even to the point of suffering with and suffering for others. Matthew chapter 25 affirms for Christians that the ongoing presence of Christ is to be found in the company of the hungry, the imprisoned, and those in need. So if we are to seek to proclaim and participate in the ongoing presence of the divine, then we are called to enter into relationship with others and to engage with their circumstance. If compassion is about being with and for others, then a foundational aspect of Christian understanding of compassion is expressed in our solidarity, our ability to come alongside others in their circumstance, to understand, to empathize, and place ourselves present in those circumstances. And it's here I want to name my first confession. When the Christian impetus to get involved in and stand alongside the lives of others in ways that assume that we know best, it has historically edged into colonization and oppression. Standing in solidarity with others must begin with the starting point that we are not sole bearers of the presence of God, but we are in fact discovering the God who is already present in cultures, languages, and even spiritualities other than our own. And this is something that the Christian church is in recent decades beginning to grapple more honestly with. In 1986, the United Church of Canada issued an apology to Native people that began, "Long before my people journeyed to this land, your people were here, and you received from your elders an understanding of creation and of the mystery that surrounds us all, that was deep and rich and to be treasured." The Uniting Church in Australia has issued similar words in a preamble to its constitution that acknowledges the presence of God in the culture, language, and spirituality of Australian First Peoples as well. So I need to acknowledge in our impetus, in our desire for solidarity, to call to solidarity, to stand alongside people, if we do so from a perspective that we already know best and that we are the sole bearers of the presence of God, it can tip over into some really unhealthy expressions of Christianity. But at its best, where we understand that God is already present before us and we can see ourselves as discoverers and learners alongside others, then that's a healthier expression of Christian solidarity. Christian solidarity then leads to the call, solidarity then leads to the Christian call for social justice. I've been trying to track down who I can attribute this quote to because I couldn't remember, but it is an as yet unattributed quote, but it is not my own. But simply the question, what value is there in pulling drowning people from a raging river if you never stop to ask who's pushing them in the river in the first place? That's the description of social justice. What value is there in pulling drowning people from the raging river, which is an act of justice, if you never stop to ask who's pushing them in the river in the first place? As the great 20th century Christian leader Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And we acknowledge the Christian involvement in many historical movements towards equality and justice. I don't name these for the sake of trying to claim Christian credit solely, but neither can we deny the Christian ethos and motivations of key protagonists in the movements. For example, the abolition of slavery, the suffragette movement, anti-war and peace activist activities, and worker labour rights movements. To take this further, Martin Luther King describes the Christian compassion for the humanity of even the oppressor, even the one who oppresses, and he describes it in terms of a double victory, which he wrote of on a number of occasions in his work "Loving Your Enemies." He wrote, "To our most bitter opponents, we say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering." This linked with this passion idea of Jesus enduring suffering. We shall meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you. We cannot, in all good conscience, obey your unjust laws, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. Throw us in jail, and we shall still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and we shall still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our community at the midnight hour and beat us and leave us half dead, and we shall still love you. But be ye assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. One day we shall win freedom, but not only for ourselves. We shall so appeal to your heart and conscience that we shall win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory. I'm reflecting at the moment on some of the conversations around freedom in our city and the proclamation. I'm seeing some of this language being enlisted. We choose not to, non-cooperation with evil is as much as moral cooperation with good, moral obligation to cooperation with good. And the question which I would wish to explore with my Christian brothers and sisters who are, marching and making proclamations about freedom is, where is the love, proclaimed love for the one or the ones who you perceive to be oppressing you? Because Martin Luther King is really clear that, as you see, throw us in jail, we shall love you. Bomb our homes, and we shall love you. It all keeps coming back to this love, in seeking this double victory for even the oppressor. And it's named further in this prayer that I'll share with you. Pray for those who are hungry. Pray harder for those who will not feed them. Pray for those who struggle each week to pay their bills. Pray harder for the wealthy who do not care. Pray for those who are homeless. Pray harder for those who deny them shelter. Pray for the sick and lonely. Pray harder for those who will not give them comfort. Pray for those who cry out for dignity. Pray harder for those who will not listen. Pray for those oppressed by unjust wages. Pray harder for those who will exploit them. Pray for those who bear the yoke of prejudice. Pray harder for those who discriminate against them. Pray for those whose basic needs are denied. Pray harder for the public officials who cater to the greedy and ignore those bound unjustly. There's a Kate Winslet film called The Reader that some of you may have. Can I just say a quick show of hands? Who might have seen The Reader? Kate Winslet film The Reader? All right. Okay. I'm going to share a quick spoiler. So if you haven't seen it, I don't know, come back in 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not sure, but the story of The Reader centers around a former Nazi prison camp guard who was put on trial for her participation in the atrocities of a concentration camp. As the story unfolds, the viewer learns the guard's secret shame. Massive spoiler alert here, so I'm giving you away the plot of the film. The viewer learns the guard's secret shame that she is in fact unable to read. And it's in seeking to keep that shame, her own personal shame at being unable to read, in seeking to keep that hidden, she permits herself to commit these horrific acts of which she's accused. So in trying to flee one personal shame, she actually endures this other horrific shame. So the film's invitation to consider the humanity of the guard, because as a viewer, we're taken through this journey of, oh my goodness, how can this person behave so inhumanely? We approach this person as an unhuman, as something other than human. And yet the film invites us to go beyond that perception and to see this person's deep shame behind that. And so we are, in fact, invited to rehumanize her, not to excuse or to diminish the scale of the horror that she was involved in, but to see a human behind that. And that's akin to the Christian invitation to try and remind ourselves of the humanity of the oppressor and, as Martin Luther King would say in his language around double victory, to remind the oppressor of their own humanity. Here's the second point of confession, which I'd like to name before I invite David and Sharon to share with us some local stories. The second point of confession is when Christianity has coupled with empire and with power, it has at times participated in oppression. And so many people in our world will have experienced a Christian as, or someone claiming allegiance to Christ as an oppressor. So when I feel a little bit conflicted that when I mention a Christian call to love the oppressor, it feels like in some circumstances that might be heard as self-serving, because at times it is the Christian who has been perceived as the oppressor. But I don't want to be seen as forgiving or dismissing our own complicity in projects such as colonization or conquest. So with that, with those confessions in place and sort of that brief skimming through compassion, compassion, empathy, solidarity to social justice, and the concept of double victory. I'd like to open to two local examples of how Christian understanding of compassion has been expressed locally and contextually. And first, I'll begin with a partnership between the Ringwood Uniting Church congregation and the Hosanna Protestant Church in Dili in Timor-Leste. And David has been a member of the Ringwood Uniting Church and has been part of that, the formation of that relationship, even visiting Timor and Timor-Leste, Dili, and helping represent that relationship. So, David, can you tell us a little bit about how long that relationship between the two congregations has been going, and what does it look like? How does that express itself?
Yeah, well, thank you, Lucas. Back in 2010, the congregation recognised that we wanted to establish a link with the people of East Timor, who had been through revolution, genocide, and struggling as a very poor nation into this modern world. So in October of 2010, we sent a small delegation of people to go over and to listen and investigate. And every year since then, up until COVID-19, we've either had a delegation from the Hosanna congregation visiting us, and or vice versa, a delegation from Ringwood visiting Hosanna. I had the privilege of going to East Timor probably in about 2015, if I'm correct. And I recall that my first impression was, here was this young, energetic nation of people who were enthusiastic about their situation. And one could be easily impressed that everything's honky-dory, everything is okay. But I was reminded quite starkly one day when we were at the beach and looking out to sea, and about no more than 5 to 10 metres offshore was this beautiful coral reef. And so we snorkeled and had a look. And then as I came back to shore, one of our hosts said, David, have a look to your left. And on the left was a very large sloping hill, quite a gentle slope. And at the end of that was a cliff dropping straight into the sea. And I was reminded of the very sad and stark reality that during occupation, many, many people had been forced to go up that hill and jump over the cliff to their death. The compassion came in when we said, okay, we're listening, we have deep listening, and that takes time, by the way, but we do want, what can we do about it? And so we worked with Hosanna to establish, they said, look, what we want to do is set up a training centre which will help the local community, the local young people, to have access to English as a language, which they feel is very important, with Portuguese and Italian being the dominant languages, to music, primarily guitar playing, and also for technology, which would be the use of PCs in technology. And so we had an agreement between Ringwood and Hosanna which developed into where we assisted as best we could, both with resources and also with strength to build up that relationship and to start that school. So over the years, that's built up. And I think we've built up a deeper relationship between the two congregations. Now, that hasn't been easy, I might add. It was because we had language difficulties and also some cultural differences which we both had to learn. So it wasn't a matter of us being just doing something under the name of compassion, but mostly the compassion is about listening. What are the real and the deep-seated challenges facing this young nation? And so it continues. And at the moment, there are some difficulties in regard to the little school, both financial, but also trying to upgrade its ability to train people to a higher level of learning. And so the relationship we have, and that's the key word, is a relationship, is that indeed I believe it's with anybody where compassion is involved, is about to continue to listen, to communicate as best we can, and continue to develop the suffering and the work that goes on in Hosanna as this young nation slowly moves out of a state of, 400 years of colonisation from Portugal, from its 1975, from the Indonesian area, etc. But to demonstrate that, it is most important to note that there is quite a significant number of Indonesian congregation who join in worship each Sunday. And so there is a relationship of empathy and understanding between the East Timorese of our congregation and their Indonesian friends. And indeed, West Timor is governed by Indonesia. So compassion, I think, is about walking on side, about being part of the struggle to understand, and being part of the struggle to grow, both in faith but also in action. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And one thing that I've noted, as has been pointed out, I've joined the Ringwood congregation over the last 2.5 years, so I've been learning about this relationship with Hosanna and getting to understand it myself. And one thing that I've been impressed by is by the Ringwood congregation's commitment to kind of shut up and get out of its own way, if you like. They are committed in this relationship to not imposing their own views and in fact, often at times actively resisting the invitation at times for to come in and tell us what to do, or which, as David points out, the East Timorese population is a long time colonised, and so that sometimes exists within the memory of that community. So it's been an active choice for the Ringwood congregation to, no, we're going to sit here and we're going to be in relationship for the long term, and we're going to develop this relationship and see what emerges out of it, not come in and impose some sort of preconceived ideas of what could be achieved here. So, yeah, I'm going to invite Shaz to share with us a little bit of the story of the Fresh Theatre for Social Change, and then I understand we're going to have some opportunity for conversation and questions, but I might just get Shaz to share her input, and then there might be things you want to come back to David on, or there might be threads that you hear coming through each of them. So Sharon is the founding director of Fresh Theatre for Social Change, which kind of primarily began its work with young people at risk. And Sharon, do you want to say a little bit about where that started and where that's moved to now?
Yeah, so Fresh began sort of as a youth drop-in centre that had an arts focus. Particularly my skill set and passion was theatre arts, and so I guess there was an inkling of the idea that there's the supportive, compassionate nature of an arts community. might be a helpful and healing place for young people that had experienced trauma or were in difficult life circumstances. And we sort of began with 3 young people in a room with myself and I think I was 20 and I was 21 and I had a 20-year-old or 18-year-old theatre assistant that was helping me. And we've sort of expanded from there. So at our largest, we sort of had 6 youth theatres around Metro Melbourne and did a young adult theatre as well as semi-professional shows. And we're now celebrating 20 years this year.
And the Ringwood Uniting Church congregation hosts a youth theatre, which is one of a number across Melbourne. But so what does that look like for those young people in say, let's take, for example, the Ringwood Theatre?
Well, we say sort of majority of the young people that come to us are referred from agencies that work with young people in crisis. And they're referred from that community. But it really is a partnership with that local community. We've got one that operates in Whittlesea and it's a partnership with the Whittlesea City Council. So it's not necessarily specific to a church community. Having said that, the program does work best when it's associated with some sort of community of people who are keen to support these young people, because by and large they're the audience that come and see them perform, and every year the young people will say, where have all these people come from, why do they care, and why are they coming to see our shows? And invariably, as you start to build relationships with the young people and their families, there are other issues that we are not able to manage as a youth community, in the youth program. For example, the family might be in difficult circumstances and needing some assistance from a food bank, or need some quick financial assistance, or just even some long-term support like transport to hospital on hospital visits if there's a parent that's unwell. We've had members of the church communities that we partnership with teach some of our young people to drive because they have a parent that's not able to drive because of disability or mental health issues. So there's lots of opportunities it tends to work best when we are able to call on the compassion of the wider community to be able to assist in supporting not just the young people, but their families as a whole.
You mentioned there the supportive or the uniquely supportive nature of arts communities. Would you suggest that offers a space for that, I guess, the expression of that solidarity that we've been talking about this afternoon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that, so there's 3 sort of tenets that the Fresh program kind of sit on. It's grace, respect, and imagination. We always we don't have rules about behaviour, but we just sort of say grace, respect, and imagination. And we, quite often when you come at that sort of imagination term, we think about creativity. But actually what the gift of imagination in that space is feeling with imagination. So when a young person plays a role that is a system role that's outside of what their experience is, or alternately, if a young person plays a role that is like something that they've experienced, it's really transformative. So, for example, we might be doing a play, and that one of the things that the young people in that group are really passionate about might be the experience of bullying. And so we might have multiple people in that space. They may be referred because they have been bullied, but they also might be referred because they're the perpetrator of bullying. And so we have this opportunity for the people who were bullied to also play, not be able to speak and offer their voice into that experience, but to actually experience what it's like by playing the person who's bullying. And vice versa, the person who is bullying is able to play the victim and be able to understand and feel with imagination. And in that moment of feeling with imagination, having a sense of compassion for the experience of the other. And so lots of young people come from lots of different, there's lots of reasons why they come, whether it's because they've, a parent has passed away, or parents are unwell. There may be a family where there's addiction involved. And as these issues start to rise to the surface, what we start to do is create sort of theatre performances that allow the young people a platform to express their experiences of that. And so as soon as you have played this, we also, it's a kind of theatre that's actually called applied theatre. So it's theatre whereby the intended outcome is not necessarily theatrical. So the actual process of taking part in the program, beyond the actual performance, which is important, and we do seasons of performance, is actually about the transformative process of understanding the other, which I guess at its core is what compassion is. It's deeply understanding, or deeply trying to understand what it's like to be someone that you are not. And that's also a very clear definition of what theatre or art is. It's trying to understand someone else in a very deep, sort of visceral, physical and emotional way. The kind of practice that we work on is very much rooted in the teachings of a Brazilian theatre practitioner called Augusto Boal. And Augusto Boal created a theatre practice called the Theatre of the Oppressed. And it's very much centered on the idea that we cannot write plays or speak for people that we are not. So we don't include in our plays stories about people with disabilities if there's no one in that theatre who has a disability to be able to voice that. We don't write plays about people from Indigenous backgrounds or Indigenous stories if we don't have representatives from that Indigenous stories. We can't speak for men if we're not men. We can't speak for women if we are not women. But the kind of practice of theatre that we do is to help those people have a platform to be able to express their own voices in that space.
That's a really good point. Thank you, because it's perhaps an underappreciated aspect of solidarity is to actually choose not to speak for another when I don't have the right to, and actually recognise the limitations of my ability to step into and speak for somebody else. But actually, the way that I can practice solidarity is sometimes to actually vacate the stage and give someone else the microphone and centre stage. I just want to leave us, I'm conscious of our time and would invite discussion and comments and questions. I just want to leave us with one final image around my experience of compassion, how compassion can act. We don't have one, but if you've been into the Good Guys or electrical appliance store recently, I've noticed there's they're selling, particularly that brand Dyson, are selling bladeless fans. Have you seen these things? And bladeless hair dryers is the latest thing. So I don't know if you've ever seen these, but they're a sort of a circular ring, and they don't have any blades in the center, but somehow they capture the air and they move air. Do people have seen those that sort of know roughly what I'm talking about? My understanding is that the way these work is that located in this ring are dozens and dozens of tiny little holes that just kind of get the air moving. And as they get the air moving, it sort of captures and moves the rest of the air alongside it. So it's called some sort of multiplier effect, a small action, a small force that actually captures a larger body of air and moves it along. And in my experience, acts of compassion are like that kind of multiplier effect, that small acts of compassion actually can encourage, induct, and capture people and bring them along to their own expressions of and actions of compassion, whether or not they share the same faith as us, the same ideology as us. Acts of compassion can be something that actually inspire others to similar acts. They can be multiplying acts. So I just wanted to leave us with that kind of image that I think speaks across faith traditions, speaks across ideologies towards a sort of a more universal experience. So